Handling asynchronous operations in JavaScript can be an intimidating and difficult task for developers. The asynchronous nature of JavaScript means that operations are not always executed in the expected order, which can lead to unexpected results. So it's important for developers to have a good understanding of how asynchronous operations work and to be able to effectively use them in their code. To do this, developers must become familiar with concepts such as promises, callbacks, and async await. In this short video, I will demonstrate the basics of promises and async await, as well as some more advanced methods available like promise all and promise all settle. So what are promises? Promises represent the eventual completion of an asynchronous operation. When we say asynchronous operation, think of HTTP request, database access, or reading a file from disk. The completion can either be a result or an error. You can use the then method to access the result or the catch method to catch the eventual error. Let's see a basic example. In this example, I am using Node fetch so that the syntax will be similar between Node.js and the browser. I have 3 HTTP endpoints. One will provide me some random person name. The second and third will provide the age and nationality based on the name. First, I start off by creating some helper functions that call these endpoints and return the response in JSON format. This statement right here returns a promise. So when we call these functions, we will get back a promise. I'm creating a similar function for all 3 endpoints. Let me start by demonstrating an anti-pattern that is called callback hell. So I start out by getting a random person name. Since this function returns a promise, we can use the then method to access the result. Now I am extracting the person's name from the HTTP response. Let's then naively call another promise inside this promise to get the age based on the name. We then also need the nationality. But you can already see where this is going. This is callback hell all over again, where you need to keep nesting callbacks over and over. Finally, let me log to the console the information from all 3 requests. This is exactly the problem that promises are supposed to fix. Promises can be chained together, allowing for multiple async operations to be run in series. This happens because the then method returns an entirely new promise that can be awaited again with another then method. So you can chain promises together. Let's take a look. Let's start by getting the random name, same as before. Then I declare 3 variables that will hold the name, age, and nationality. Instead of getting the user age here, let's just return the execution of this function, which, if you remember, returns a promise. We can chain another then method, which will receive the result from the promise we return at the previous step. We do exactly the same in order to get the nationality. And let's log to the console exactly as before. Lastly, let's chain the catch method so that we can handle any errors we might possibly get. As you can see, this works, and it's a flatter syntax which makes it a lot more readable and manageable. Async await leverages the power of promises underneath. If you use the async keyword when declaring a function, 2 things happen. 1. You can use the await keyword to pause the execution of the function until the promise is resolved. And 2. This function will also return a promise. In doing so, we can write more concise, sequential code that is easier to maintain and debug. Let's refactor the logic above in an asynchronous function. We start by declaring the function using the async keyword. Inside, we open up a try-catch block that will handle any asynchronous error thrown in it. We can use the await keyword on any promise, including the ones returned by our helper functions. I can store the result of the asynchronous operation in a variable, and on the next line I can start using that value since it will be available because we awaited it. We then repeat this for all the 3 values we need. This is very similar to what we did before. Finally, we can log everything to the console. To view the result, we need to execute this function. As you can see, this is a clear and concise implementation. It's very easy to read and follow. Another benefit is the fact that you can use const to declare all these variables that indeed have no reason to change. You might have noticed that in order to get the age and nationality, we only need the name. So there is no reason why these 2 operations should wait for one another. Using promise.all allows us to fire multiple promises immediately one after another, without waiting for any of them to resolve. We then wait for all the promises to resolve, with the whole taking no longer than the slowest operation in the batch. As you can see, promise.all takes in an array of promises, which I create here in line by opening square brackets and executing the functions that return promises right here. It also returns an array of results, which I destructure right here on the left-hand side. Let's compare the 2 implementations to see how much time we save by using promise.all. I will use the console.time method to start a timer and end the timer after we log the first result in the classic promise implementation. I'll also start the second timer in the asynchronous function, which uses promise.all. And we can see a massive improvement. It takes almost half the time when using promise.all. Note that promise.all throws an error as soon as any operation fails, and this can be problematic, as it's not always desirable to abort the whole process if a single operation fails. To avoid this, promise.all_settled can be used instead. This method will resolve with an array of objects that indicate which operations have been successful and which have failed. This can be particularly useful in cases where it's important to know the status of all operations, regardless of whether or not they have failed. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it informative. If you learned something from the video, I'd really appreciate it if you take the time to subscribe to my channel.